Welcome to our next video. Today we're going to be talking a little bit more about the neuroscience and what is actually happening in our brain. So this is a very important video for understanding why we respond to trauma the way that we do. So what I'd like to do is just kind of give it to you in my words, kind of the way that I see it in my mind. And then I'm gonna also allow some other people to explain it the way that they see it in their mind. And then we're gonna also see some proof. We're gonna see some neuroscience and we're gonna see some images. So I wanted to talk today about a very specific process in your brain or part to your brain that's called the amygdala. The amygdala is actually a brilliant aspect of your brain. So what the amygdala does is it is constantly scanning. In the same way that your heart is constantly beating, in the same way that your lungs are constantly expanding to take in air, and the same way that your eyelids are constantly blinking. These are our body's responses that they're innate. These are our responses that we don't have to think to produce. In the same way, in our brain, there are tons of different things that we could talk about when it comes to trauma, but I'm gonna focus in on the part of the brain that's called the amygdala. And the amygdala, I want you to think of a drawbridge. I want you to think of, in our area, living here in Charleston, if you live somewhere else, we do have a drawbridge, and it's over onto an area that we call Sullivan's Island. And what happens is when that drawbridge is lifted, no one can get across. You just gotta wait, unless you wanted to turn around, go get in a boat and go across in a different way. But when the drawbridge is lifted, you just have to wait until it comes back down and connects to the other side and you can safely go across. In the same way, the amygdala is a drawbridge, and it can sometimes lift and lift quickly. It can sometimes lift slowly. It can sometimes lift halfway, but there's no going across until it comes back down. So the same thing happens in your mind when your amygdala, which it's designed to do, senses that you are not safe. So your amygdala is constantly scanning, the same way your brain is constantly beating and your eyelids are constantly blinking. Your amygdala is scanning the room, it's scanning the road, it's scanning your school, your room, the hallway, everywhere you go, the amygdala is like a little radar constantly scanning for danger. A lot of times the amygdala is totally fine. They're like, no danger, no danger, no danger. But the second the amygdala senses danger, it will lift up that drawbridge and it will immediately tell another part of your brain, the hypothalamus, it'll tell it to, we're in trouble, warning, warning, it's time to flee, you better fight, you can freeze if you want to, but these are it is time to, we are triggered. We have fight or flight, which a lot of people have heard about before. So you either fight, right? That's that you get scared and you punch. We can run, fight or flight. We can flee, we can just run away. That's another one, just run. That's the people that that video was made for. As soon as they see danger, run, da-da-da-da-da, and they're out. You don't even need to tell them twice. Dog is running at you, they run. They don't need to be told. They're not sitting thinking, what's the best course of action for me right now? No, their amygdala is triggered, their hypothalamus is kicked in, and they are full of adrenaline, and they are either fighting, they are running. You can freeze. Like, that's what happens to me. I freeze. When that amygdala gets triggered, I just freeze. And it's like I can't move. If I see a spider, especially when I was younger, if I see a spider coming towards me, it's like I can't get my body to listen to me when I'm telling it to run away. It's like, no, I'm frozen, I can't even move. The other one is to submit. So what happens is you have fight, flight, freeze, submit. Submit are the people who are willing to just do whatever they're told to do in a situation. They'll get on the floor, they'll get in the fetal position, because in their amygdala is triggered and they're not even thinking about it. They just immediately like crumple to the floor and submit. If that's you, I'm thinking of my friend right now. If she gets scared, crumple. She doesn't freeze in place. She don't run. She doesn't fight. She immediately crumples to the floor. She submits. And she can't control that. It's not like she's thinking to herself, I shall now crumple to the floor. Her body does it. It's just like blinking, heart beating, taking a breath. It happens without you asking it to, which is why you can never judge someone in a trauma response for the way they're behaving. It's the same way of saying, like, you better get your heart rate under control. Like, you better lessen your heart rate. No one has that control. Same is happening with your amygdala. Your amygdala is triggered. That drawbridge has lifted. It's told your body you are not safe, and you just immediately freeze, you flee, you fight, or you submit. So think about your own life. Think about what you do. If you were to be scared by someone in your family as you're coming up the stairs and they're playing a prank on you, which one of those things do you do? If you ever had like an instance where you were like surprised, a bug flew in your face, or someone came up behind you and just went like rawr, or you were surprised by, I don't know, like a ball flying towards you, what do? Are you the kind of person that like, whoo, you go and catch it real fast because you're like a fighter, your body just immediately like whoop, or you punch? Are you the kind that would just like freeze and it would hit you straight in the face? Are you the kind that would run away, or are you the kind that would just crumple? So just think about that for a few minutes. Go ahead and take your journal out and just write down for the next few minutes a story in your life where it proves to you which one of those things your amygdala does. Do you flee? Do you run? Oh, I have a story. I just ran. I got out of there. Do you freeze? Do you fight? Do you have a story where someone scared you and you punched them right square in the face and then you felt bad about it because you were like, oh, I'm sorry, you were just trying to be funny? Or do you have a story, or do you know of a story where you just fell to the floor, fetal position, you just froze, you couldn't even like stand on legs? Go ahead and write that down for the next few seconds. All right, welcome back. So now that you know kind of your own body's response when that amygdala gets triggered and the drawbridge is up and you are just in this survival mode, you can see why the brain is designed to work this way. Because let's say it wasn't funny. It wasn't someone scaring you or being silly or a bug or something that's funny. Let's say it was serious and your life was in danger and you had to respond to survive. Your amygdala is meant to keep you alive in those situations, to do whatever it takes to keep you alive. If that's running when you see a gun, if that's submitting, hoping that they'll look over you and shoot other people because you're on the ground, if that's fighting because you are being kidnapped and you need to fight to survive, whatever it is, your body is designed to not think and just do those things to survive. Someone comes in with a gun, you are not rationalizing the 19 choices that you have, and your brain is not thinking through training, your brain is not thinking through decisions that you have. Your amygdala is not allowing access to your frontal cortex. Your frontal cortex is where you do your problem solving. The frontal cortex holds creativity, it holds problem solving, it holds your rational thoughts. That part of your brain is not needed to keep you alive and to help you survive during a moment of trauma. You need to act, because if you stand there and you think too much, you die, you know? So it's really designed to keep you safe and alive. The hard thing is the amygdala, when it's scanning, cannot tell the difference between real danger and perceived danger. Whether you're really safe and are just thinking about something that was really hard or thinking about something that's making you anxious in the future, your brain cannot, your amygdala that's constantly scanning for danger, cannot tell that you're not actually in danger when you're thinking about these things. It immediately assumes you are in danger. So that kid in your classroom that sees the girl in the hallway, she sees the girl walk in the hallway that just posted that horrible post about her, calling her all sorts of names, getting her friends to hate her, telling lies about her. All she does is see her walk by, and her brain remembers that post, and all of a sudden her amygdala is like, you are not safe. You are not safe. This is not safe. You are in danger, danger, danger. And it immediately lifts that drawbridge. And your amygdala is not thinking through rational thoughts. Wait a minute. I'm totally safe. I'm sitting in this classroom. I'm totally fine. Your amygdala is not thinking about how creative you have to be on the assignment in front of you, where you have to write a journal entry about being a pioneer and what you would have experienced and going through the Oregon Trail, and you have to write. You can't be creative in that moment. You can't logically assess the situation in that moment. Your ability to access those skills has been cut off. You are immediately triggered, and that girl walking by, your amygdala says you're not safe, shooting you with all sorts of adrenaline, and you're just fight, flight, flee, or submit. Which one of those are you gonna do? And then your teacher is yelling at you, and you don't really even understand what's happening because you haven't done anything for 15 minutes, and your paper is blank, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, what is wrong with me? Why am I so anxious? Why is, and you almost can't even move forward. You have just been, your amygdala has been triggered, and you can't even think of what you're supposed to be doing right now. A situation like that happened with me. I have been a mom of 3 children. 2 I got to keep and raise, Easton and McCaden. McCaden is 10 and Easton is 6. And I love them with my whole heart. And I'm so glad I got to keep them and raise them. They are the apple of my eye. They are the joy of my soul. And yet, when specific things were to happen with Easton and McCaden, something in me would be triggered, and I would just immediately respond in ways that were irrational, in ways that were they were hurtful. And it was because my response wasn't grounded in any kind of logic or problem solving. I just responded and I would lash out. A lot of times I would freeze and I would just be so overwhelmed with the situation. And it was nothing. It was nothing. There was nothing happening that should have elicited that response. So I saw it happen in my own life where it was like I couldn't even control, because we can't control our amygdala. I couldn't control it. No matter how hard I studied, I tried to read about the Bible and what does God say about this. I tried to read books about it. And I just couldn't fix the part of me. I prayed all the time, like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I stop doing this? And I didn't know that it wasn't in my control to stop my amygdala. And I also didn't have tools to battle it either. Because just as much as the amygdala is telling your brain you're not safe, and it's tricking your brain into thinking you're not safe, because here I am totally safe. Here that girl in the classroom, she was totally safe. She wasn't being hurt by that girl that walked by. We're not being hurt again by trauma that's happened in our past, but we're thinking about it, and our brain is being tricked into thinking we're not safe when we totally are. So let's trick it back. If there's a way it can trick us into having these responses, let's trick it back. Let's give ourselves some tools to re-engage that frontal cortex and to tell our amygdala to knock it off and let me be creative and allow me to problem solve and allow me to apply logic to this situation. It's the reason why once you've calmed down and the car ride home, you've got the best comebacks to that conversation that left you frozen. You have the best points to that presentation that you forgot everything you were supposed to say. And on the way home, you're like, what is wrong with me? Same brain. The same brain that is in this head all of a sudden has the most clever, the most creative, the most thoughtful things. I can apply logic. I can dance circles words wise around this thing that crippled me earlier. And it's because your amygdala was triggered and it wasn't allowing you to access your frontal cortex to have that conversation with that person. It wasn't allowing you to access your frontal cortex so that you could dance circles in that presentation, in that boardroom. All of a sudden you're like, I'm a genius on the car ride home, because your brain is allowing you to access the parts of your mind that you need. So let's trick our amygdala into coming back down. Let's trick the drawbridge into connecting the sides of our brain that need to access our frontal cortex. It's already being tricked in the first place. So grounding is what tricks our amygdala into lowering that drawbridge. And for everyone, it's going to happen fast. Some of us is going to be like, yep, there it is, done. Like the story that the counselor that I'm going to bring in to talk to you is going to teach you a little bit about how she watches one of her clients, her son, and he can just immediately, oh, I'm upset, nope, down. And it takes seconds. For some of us, it's going to take a little longer. Okay, we're going to access it again. So if you see me do this all the time, my amygdala is triggered. It's that drawbridge, just lifting, and I cannot access the frontal cortex until that drawbridge is lowered. Until that amygdala is like, okay, I am safe. I am safe. Now let's let the pathways connect again. So I'm going to show you another way of thinking about this. This really funny video that I found online. It's also called the lizard brain. I don't relate to that as much, maybe because I'm a girl and I'm like, I don't want to be no lizard. So I don't relate to the lizard brain as much, but the same idea might relate to you. You might really just be like, oh no, I totally get that, Lena, lizard brain. That's where I'm at. It totally makes sense to me. So we're going to say the same thing in a little bit of a different way. Stay with this guy. He does a great way of explaining this lizard brain. He does it in his own vibe to his own audience. So take what you love about it and then just leave the rest. And we'll connect again back together at the end of this video of this guy explaining the lizard brain. And I'll show you some images of the brain in trauma and what is happening, so that you have a little more information besides the amygdala, how it's being triggered, how it works, which can also be called the lizard brain. and then some images to kind of help you know what is going on up there in your mind and in the mind of your children when they are just, you cannot reason with them. Reason is gone. Reason is gone. I cannot reason with you. Okay.
I think if you dig into the research of learning and development, it's pretty clear that one of our biggest hurdles to become a great learner is fear. Anybody can learn to beat fear. That's a skill that any of us can develop. But the way that we do that is much different than you might think. My intent today is very straightforward. It's just to bridge the gap between what the science says about fear and how we normally think about it and talk about it. First, we need to talk about where fear comes from. It's actually wired in. And it comes from a region of our brain called our amygdala. And some people call this our lizard brain. It doesn't really matter what you call it. We know a few things about this. First, everybody has an amygdala. It lives right by our brain stem. It's about the size of 2 almonds. It's there for survival. It's there to keep us alive. And one of its most common tactics to keeping us alive is it generates fear to steer us away from danger. Which is why if we're at a baseball game and the batter accidentally throws their bat and it's flying into the crowd, most people duck. That's our lizard brain at play. It's quick and reactive. It detects a threat, generates fear, we duck. It's also why I can walk around the edge of this dot and I feel perfectly fine, because it's about 2 centimeters high. If this was 150 feet high, I would be freaking out right now. That's my lizard brain generating fear, saying, dude, get away from the edge of the cliff. Our lizard brain is great at its job. However, there's a bit of a glitch to the system. The glitch is our amygdala doesn't really know the difference between the good challenges and the dangerous ones in life. And it doesn't know the difference between the good and bad risks. So its tactic is really to just avoid them altogether. There are 4 sort of triggers that really enhance and create fear: uncertainty, attention, change, and struggle. The idea here is if these 4 elements are present, fear will be present. Now, I think we can all agree that those 4 elements could absolutely describe a dangerous situation. But they're also present in the best learning opportunities as well. They're present when we perform and compete in art and music. Learning involves lots of these things. And again, if these 4 elements are present, fear will be present. And more times than not, when we feel fear, we find a way to avoid doing the thing, which is excellent when it comes to danger, but not ideal for learning. So yes, this keeps us safe from bats flying at our head, but this is also why we don't like to ask and answer questions in a group. Think about it. If I called on you and you raised your hand to speak up and give an answer, what happens? Most of the people in the room go, phoom, and they look at you. You have attention. There's also some uncertainty at play. It might be the wrong answer or a dumb question. With uncertainty and attention comes fear. More times than not, we don't ask the question. We call that the lizard won the battle. This small little moment would challenge us and stretch us out of our comfort zone. We feel fear, we don't ask. We've all been there. This is why back in the day you had a paper due in 2 weeks. What day would you write the paper? Night before, same, every time. Procrastination in a big way is coming from the lizard brain, because every day leading up to the due date, we have a choice to sit down and do the research and write, or watch Netflix. Which one do you think my lizard wants? Netflix. But let's talk about why. Through the eyes of the lizard, the world is black and white. It doesn't really know what we're doing. In its eyes, it's either I could struggle right now or not struggle. It's always going to choose to not struggle. Another tactic I do, I call it downgrading the struggle. Like, rather than writing a new article on my website, I'll vacuum my house 3 times. I'm staying busy, but I'm choosing the option that involves less struggle, uncertainty, attention, or change. This is why I wake up in the morning and say, I am definitely going to cook a healthy meal tonight. And then I work all day, and I'm driving home, feeling tired, and my car does this really weird thing. It sees a Chipotle and goes, scoot, and pulls in. That's my lizard brain at play. In that moment, I'm presented a choice. I could have something salty, fatty, and delicious right now. Or go to the store, buy the ingredients, go home and prepare them. Which one do you think my lizard wants? Chipotle with extra guac. Now, I want to be clear that the tactic of taking what we can get and getting it now, choosing easy over hard, instant gratification, that is excellent back in the day for survival when we didn't know when our next meal was going to be. It's great to keep us out of danger. But we're playing a different game now, but the software is the same. This is also why giving this talk is way harder than the one I did last night in my hotel room. This is also why we've all been in our basement watching TV for a couple hours, and we know for a fact there are no monsters in the basement. But then you turn the TV off, and you turn the lights off, and then you walk upstairs like this. That's our lizard brain. Think about that. We know nothing's in the basement. But as soon as it's dark, the lizard goes, "Ugh, I'm gone." It's kind of funny to joke about, but the problem is that's the force that's driving lots of our behavior. That's the force that's making lots of our decisions. I guess what I'm getting at is the tactic of avoiding uncertainty, attention, struggle, and change is great if we're in danger, but most of our life is spent not really in danger. And in this case, that tactic really robs us of amazing opportunities to grow. A high school student shared she was in the final qualifying round to get on The Voice, the singing show, and that she had to sing one more song. And if it went well, she could have made it on. It came time to sing the song, she freaked out and left. She shared this in front of her classmates, and many of the students in the room gave her the scrunched up, "What are you thinking?" look. And they're kind of right, like singing that song could have changed her life. Here's the truth about fear. It's really easy to sit in a comfortable room and talk about what we could do and should do. And it's even easier to talk about what other people could do and should do. Like, it's easy to say, on paper, of course, the third grader should play in the infield. He'll be fine. And on paper, of course, she should have got on the stage and sang the song. That's easy to say. But the truth is, if we're in their shoes with their experiences, we probably do the same thing, because fear is such a powerful force. Every day, no matter who we are or what we do, fear is robbing us of opportunities to grow. I actually learned about this topic from my hero. That guy right there, his name is Seth Godin. He is my absolute hero. And I had the honor of Skyping with him a few years ago, and we had an incredible conversation about fear. He taught me about the lizard brain and what it does. As he was going through this, it rocked my world big time. Because as he was teaching me this, I was flashing back to all the times in my life that fear has messed me up. Here's my biggest. I actually grew up in Lander, Wyoming, which is also called the middle of nowhere. And it was my dream since about 5th grade to go to school at Duke University, and I was obsessed with that. From 5th to 12th grade, I chased that with everything I had. Long story short, I was accepted into the school, probably because they needed someone from Wyoming, but I got in, and I got out to Durham, North Carolina for my first year of college, thousands of miles from home. I was way out of my comfort zone, which meant there was a lot of fear. I felt like everybody there was smarter than me and better than me and richer than me, and that I didn't really belong. And during my first year of classes at my dream school, I never said a word in a class. I never asked a question, never answered a question, didn't participate in discussion. On the days I was supposed to get up and present like this, I skipped. Why? Because my lizard was at the wheel, generating lots of fear. I felt if I gave the wrong answer, they were going to know I'm the guy from Wyoming that doesn't belong here. The way I see it, fear robbed me of a year of development at an incredible school. So let's go back to this conversation with Seth. As he's teaching me this, and I flash back to that, I think you can start to guess what I asked him next. My question was, how do you get rid of this? Because my thinking was, fear made me bad at learning. If I remove the fear, then I can be good at learning. So the question I asked is, how do you kill the lizard brain? His response changed my life. He said, "I'm thrilled you asked the question that way, because that is exactly the wrong question." That if you're seeking to destroy, defeat, conquer the lizard brain, you will fail. Your brain is nothing but a chemistry experiment. It's electricity and chemicals. And when you push back on the lizard brain, when you try to bargain and reason with the lizard brain, it freaks out, it inflames. You cannot win. But what you can do is dance with the lizard brain. What you can do is realize that our lizard brain is a compass. I used to travel around telling people to be fearless and to not be afraid. Now that we understand how fear works and where it comes from, think about the problems of that approach. I think there are two big ones. In telling someone to be fearless, we're really telling them to do something that can't be done. That if we're doing something that involves uncertainty, attention, struggle, and change, we're gonna feel fear. And the only way to feel no fear is to not do it, not care, or hold back. And that's not what we want. So logically, if I care and it involves uncertainty, attention, change, and struggle, I'm gonna feel fear. I can name it what I want, but that feeling is there. I think the second problem is this creates shame around fear and can make it worse. Let's say you're sitting in the lobby before your dream job interview. You're sitting there before you go in. Do you care about that interview? Probably. Is there some uncertainty? Yeah, you might get it, you might not. There's some attention, there's struggle. Are you gonna feel a little something, something? Without a doubt. The problem is if everyone around you is telling you, you have to be fearless, don't be afraid, do you see how that can start to snowball and create shame? You might be sitting there and go, uh-oh, I'm not supposed to feel like this. Something must be wrong, I must not be ready, no one else feels like this, and all of that can snowball and make the fear worse. But it's all coming from this flawed idea of I'm not supposed to feel fear. The big upgrade we're trying to make is for people to understand feeling fear before a big job interview or a performance or a talk, anything that stretches us and challenges us. It doesn't mean something's wrong. It doesn't mean we're not ready. It means we're a human. That's the human response. The fear doesn't go anywhere. My lizard is freaking out right now. This is a skill. This is something we can all get better at. Once again, this is a skill, which means it's something that we can build up to. I'm not saying go home tonight and pick the thing that freaks you out the most and do it tomorrow. But I am saying in treating this as a skill, we can start to get reps and practice of feeling fear and asking the question anyways. Feeling fear and volunteering for the project a little bit outside of our comfort zone. The more that we do that, we're building that muscle for the bigger leaps we'll make later. Nobody is perfect with this. My lizard brain still wins lots and lots of battles. The idea is to be aware of the process and aware of our choices. Thank you.
So being a neuroscientist, when I go back to the drawing board, that drawing board is a brain. And I wanted to be, as I tell my students, let's be brain whisperers of a sort, and see what is important to the brain. And what really stands out to me is how our brains seem to be designed and evolved to move our bodies around. We like to think that our brains are about thinking, but movement is an incredibly important behavior. If we think about the cerebellum hanging off the back of our brains, it contains about 80% of our brain's neurons, 80%. And what does the cerebellum do? Well, it does a lot of things, but it's most noted for its role in controlling our motor coordination. And the areas that around the center of the brain, called the striatum, also involved in coordinating and facilitating our movement. And in fact, individuals who have Parkinson's disease or Huntington's disease have some impairment of the system. And then going from the middle of our brain down to our ear is the motor cortex. And it's involved in moving the specific muscles that are important for us to initiate and carry out that behavior that we want to carry out. And if you look at the proportion of that motor cortex and what the muscles that it's coordinating and controlling, it's the area that controls the hand is disproportionately large. It seems like nature is telling us movement is incredibly important, and movement of our hands is also very important. It's hard to believe that just in 1939, and the New York Times ran an article about this invention that was revealed at the World's Fair. It was called the television. It was really a neat thing, they said. But they said it will never be more popular than the radio, because what family has time to sit in front of a TV in the evenings and not use their hands to do work? Wow, things have really changed over the last century and past generations. When I think about my own childhood, going back, driving back to Talladega, Alabama to see my grandparents, I have vivid memories of how busy, especially my grandmother was. After working in the factory, her downtime was spent shelling peas or shucking corn or snapping green beans on that front porch, only to be followed by freezing and canning and preparing that food. Wow, how things have changed. I'm beginning to... And he said that when he would walk around his property, and there was a path called the thinking path, that it would calm his nerves. And he would put a rock at the gate, and he would have his walking stick, and when he would walk around that path, he would knock that rock off to signify the effort that he had made. And if it was an especially stressful day, he'd put 2 rocks. And even more, he might have a 3-rock walk, and he'd have to walk 3 times and knock that stone over. Well, he wasn't just realizing that his behavior was important in regulating his emotions, but he was even dosing himself. And whether or not he was going to have a 1-walk, 2-walk, or 3-walk a day. So this idea of behavior was incredible. He saw that it was important for regulating his mental health. And in the days when cake mixes came out, mostly women making the cakes those days, the first cake mixes had everything you needed to make the cake. You just needed to pour the batter in the pan. But some very smart manufacturers noticed that women didn't take as much pride in their cakes if they didn't have a little skin in the game. So then they didn't have to, but they took the egg and the water. So you'd have to add the egg and the water. Gave you a little bit more effort, and people were more proud of the cake. So thinking that behavior is important for our mental health, and we can change our behavior and change our neurochemistry through behavior, as our ancestors have, it caused me to think about a new word, a word I just made up, behaviorceuticals. So we can change our neurochemistry by taking a pill that will alter our neurochemistry, or maybe we can change our neurochemistry strategically by engaging in smart behaviors that will change it in more healthy ways.
So just to recap, what we learned today was the amygdala, the role of the amygdala, what it does. Think of that drawbridge that does not allow access to the frontal cortex. The frontal cortex is where we have our reasoning and creativity skills and ability to apply logic to a situation. So those pathways are cut off when our amygdala is telling us that we are not safe. Whether it's through fear or past trauma or current trauma, it's being triggered. Up it goes. We also learned that can be called the lizard brain. And if you ever hear that throwing around, you know exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about the amygdala, the brain that responds to avoid fear. Anything to avoid it. Run, flee, fight, or submit. Anything to avoid it. We're going to avoid that fear to keep us alive. And that there is no expectation to master that fear or to be fearless. That those expectations he was talking about really set us up for failure. We're all going to experience these things. There's never going to be a time in your life when, I'm done dealing with fear. I've conquered it. I've overcome it, and I never have to do with it again. So it makes sense that we would teach skills to battle this thing that's going to constantly happen our whole lives. And the last thing that I loved was our neuroscientist, which we will hear from again, really laying out some important knowledge in her words about what happens in the brain. And she's really talking more about depression. That's my dog that you hear. She's talking more about depression. Her focus is to alleviate depression, but there is a lot of similarities to what she says about what happens in the brain, what she has learned, and what we're learning together as well. And it's great to hear from an actual neuroscientist who is also quite skilled at talking to people, which is rare. So that's awesome. She was a good find. And then lastly, I'm going to end this video today just showing you a few images. So if you've been driving this whole time and haven't really been able to look, these images are going to be, I'm going to kind of try to describe what's going on in them if needed. Some of them already have descriptions on them, and it just shows you kind of what's happening in the brain. Just another kind of visual to have in the back of your mind for this particular video, which the goal of this was to really give you all the good stuff that I learned about the brain, about the specific structures of the brain and what's going on in the brain. So I hope you've enjoyed listening in the different ways that have been presented to you this information. I hope some of them really stick and you're really starting to digest what is going on in the mind, and it feels like, oh, I get it. Yeah, okay, I get it. This is knowledge that I can maintain and keep, and then maybe even also teach my kids, because it's not really challenging. They can understand the drawbridge. They can understand the lizard brain. They can understand that certain behaviors make them feel better, which is really what the neuroscientist was kind of getting at. There's certain behaviors that can help us mentally, and they just kind of help us feel better. And we'll get more into her on another video. I hope these images help you understand a little bit more. This shows you an image that I was taught at the conference that I kind of learned where to start with all of this. It was revolutionary to me to think of the brain in terms of my hand. It kind of looks like your hand, so it helps if you were going to teach this to other people. This is a well-known image, and I did not make it up. So this is the hand. You can see the amygdala, the base of the brainstem, the frontal cortex. I'm pretty sure I was calling the prefrontal cortex just the frontal cortex when I was explaining this earlier in the video. It's the area in red. It's actually the prefrontal cortex. So excuse me for continuing to call it the frontal cortex. And just take a few minutes and look at all the things that that area is kind of responsible for. That limbic brain in pink represents the area where your amygdala is. This is an image that you may have seen before. It shows on the left a brain scan of a child who had everything they needed when they were younger, and then on the right is actually a brain scan of a child who was in an orphanage and received not just minimal care, but actually some trauma. So there were some abuse was happening. And you can see the areas that did not develop as a result of the malnutrition and the abuse. And the good thing when you look at this is that we have discovered that our brains can grow. these areas can grow. We can grow them back if we establish the connections that I'm talking to you about today, where the neural pathways strengthen as we continue to practice during that drawbridge, as we practice being safe and giving tools to battle the lizard brain and the drawbridge. They create consistent pathways back and forth and back and forth and back and forth that actually rebuild parts of the brain that might have gotten lost, which is incredible and such a picture of hope.
Well, I think what brain imaging has really helped us to do is make an invisible mental injury visible. Right? And so in the past, people with mental illness, all their symptoms were invisible. And I think that really contributed to the stigma of mental illness. You can now visibly see that something is wrong with the brain. And so by mapping out some of the different brain changes and how the networks function differently in psychiatric illness, for example, post-traumatic stress, it's really helped us to get a much better understanding of how the disorder works in the brain, and it's really helped us to think more about how to approach treatment. Yes, there's very different responses to stress, and I think that also translates into two different types of post-traumatic stress. And what we've shown is that about 70% of people have this presentation where they have too much emotion, right? Too much fear, too much anger, too much shame. They're hyper-aroused, their heart rate increases when they're triggered. But then there's another subgroup of post-traumatic stress disorder patients that have a very different response. So when they're triggered, they're often very detached from their emotions. They shut down. Their emotions are too overwhelming for them to deal with them. And so I think it's a way the mind copes to really overcome tremendous stress and hyper-emotionality. And so these people detach themselves from their emotions. They're numb, they don't feel anything. Often they have out-of-body responses. They feel like they're disconnected from their own body, and the world feels like it's unreal for them. Now we're learning that the brain stem, so the old reptilian brain, is very affected in post-traumatic stress because that is sort of deals with innate reflexive alarm responses. And so I think what that teaches us is to think about how can we target that part of the brain directly with different treatment strategies.
So these sets of images are really interesting to me. They show on the left just a normal, healthy connection between the neural pathways in our mind, what it's kind of supposed to look like. And then all the way to the right shows someone who has experienced PTSD, and you can just see the drawbridge. The drawbridge just has not allowed those pathways to connect back and forth and back and forth and back and forth in the way that they're supposed to. So it's so important for us to lower that drawbridge in the mind when a child is experiencing these fear or trauma triggers, and just let those pathways connect over and over and over, and it'll get faster and faster and faster. And it looks like the image in the middle actually has no sense of impairment when it comes to memory. I find that very, very interesting. So just take a second and look at that further. So the last thing we're going to do after looking at those images, the final step for today is just a little bit of journaling, just a little bit of writing some things down. And today I want you to write down who did you continue to think about this entire hour that you listened, 45 minutes that you listened to these things? Who kept coming to your mind? If no one specific came to your mind, I want you to ask yourself, who could this apply to? It could be a student that you teach. It could be yourself. It could be a family member. That's a big one. It could be your own children. It could be a spouse. I just want you to take a few minutes and you're just going to journal. A lot of you had mentioned that you learn best by doing. And that's trickier when we can't be together. If COVID wasn't a thing, we could have done this in an afternoon together. We could have spent time. We could have talked. We could have had experiences where we shared. So this is your do. This helps those of you who really learn best by doing and applying. It also helps the strategy that I learned sometimes as a teacher is we learn when we write it down. There's something that happens in our brain. When we write something down, our mind remembers it. So for the next few minutes, just take out a sheet of paper or your journal, if you journal, and just write down who you want to focus on that would love to know what I just taught, that would benefit from knowing what's happening in their brain. And just write. It could be 4 sentences that you write. If you're a writer, this might be more like 4 pages that you write as you apply to different people in your life. Oh, my dad really needs, he needs to know what's happening in the brain. He would love this. Oh, my son, I can see it in his mind that he just, boom, his drawbridge is up. And if I were to tell him this or apply this to him, it would just revolutionize things for our family. So just take a few minutes and go ahead and journal.